Welcome to Impact the World, the show for and about creatives, changemakers, and entrepreneurs. This is a conversation episode where a special guest shares with me what they are creating and the behind-the-scenes journey of their experience. Hello, welcome to Impact the World, where my guest this week is Dave Markowitz. Dave and I go back around a decade now, and he is a beautiful and impeccable healer who works very closely with sensitives, empaths, and gives sensitives and empaths tools and ways of healing and also ways of being in the world that will allow them to not be encumbered by their gift, but instead thrive through their gift. So I know for many of you who tune into my work and this show, this is going to be right up your alley. If you do enjoy the Impact the World show and you want to support us, because we are an independent show, you can do that by either hitting subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening over on Apple Podcasts or any other platform, if you subscribe, rate, and review us, it helps us reach more people. So thank you so much for doing that. You can find out all of Dave's work at davemarkowitz.com. We will put the link to his website and some of his work in the show notes as ever. But for now, I hope you enjoy this healing conversation with Dave. Dave, it is so good to have you here on Impact the World. Thank you for coming and talking to me for the show today.
Of course, thank you. I'm excited.
Well, we go back, I realized this morning, we go back 9 years. We met, of all places, in Las Vegas in 2012. We were both invited onto the Virtual Light broadcast, which was Steve Rother's broadcast, and we were both being interviewed. And so I met you that morning, and I loved what you were doing. When I saw you interviewed and explaining your work, I was fascinated by your work, but we also connected on humor, you and I. So it was kind of a really nice meeting, and we've stayed in touch ever since. But what hit me as I was driving here today to have this conversation with you, I remember even in 2012, for me in this field, the word empath, sensitive, these were terms I was just coming to terms with in myself, just slowly, and beginning to recognize that pattern in the work. And yet that was something that you were already providing work and tools and awareness around. So I salute you for that. And I think it's the first question I have for you is, what is it like to be in the world now doing the work that you do? And more people are becoming aware of those traits and coming to people like yourself for support and guidance with those traits.
It's great. I don't have to explain what it's like to be an empath any longer. Right? So yeah, it's just becoming much more common, more understood. And I think one of the most beautiful things about it is many people that I work with, and myself, and maybe yourself as well, we feel very alone in our being. And one of the nicest compliments I get from people who have read the book, I mean, it's great to hear things like I've had X, Y, and Z pain or illness and it's gone, and that's beautiful. But the thing that really gets me in the heart is when someone says, I don't feel alone anymore.
Mm.
And I think as this becomes more and more known, that feeling, that connectedness of what we're all really a part of becomes more tangible. So that to me is just super exciting.
When did you know that you had this high sensitivity or this empathy? Was it from childhood, or did it reawaken in you at a certain point?
I was probably either in denial about it or just didn't know anything about it, or I don't know. But at one point, shortly before we met, actually, several people would just sometimes approach me out of nowhere and say things like, you're really empathic. And one guy kept saying, you're an empath, you're an empath. And it was like one of these scenes out of a movie, and he followed that with, I'm the head of the Portland meetup for empaths, and I know an empath when I see one. And I just kept saying that, and like I really didn't own it at all. I just, for whatever reason, I fought it. And I guess my empathic awakening, if you will, was I was invited out to a friend of a friend's birthday party. And I didn't know till I got there that it was 7 bars in 7 hours, one of these bar crawls. I really hadn't drank since college. So it was, I wasn't super prepared for it, but, whatever, when in Rome. And at the end of the night, I had the experience of being drunk, and I didn't drink any alcohol the entire night. And I finally got in a cab, and in this sort of semi-lucid state, I don't know what to call it, the message came very clearly, like, this is what we've been trying to tell you. Spirit's just saying, this is what it's like to be an empath, and things, get ready, put your seatbelt on. And from that moment on, I would say every new person that came to me, because I was doing more traditional medical intuition, more traditional generalized energy healing prior to that moment. And as of that moment until now, everyone that comes to me resonates with being empathic, highly sensitive, or intuitive, or any combination. So just real shift, and I mean, and I feel grateful. And of course, it can change tomorrow, who knows? But for right now, I'm just riding it. It's great.
It's beautiful. And how did you get into the medical intuitive work and the work that you were doing at that time? How did that all begin?
Out of frustration, like many people probably listening, I have nothing against Western medicine. I think they do an amazing job at what they do. However, it is limited, just like I'm limited, just like everything, every person in some way is limited. And I had an ailment that they could not diagnose, they couldn't prescribe anything. It was just over and over and over. And, it kind of forced me into finding alternatives. So I started out with the so-called more traditional alternatives. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but acupuncture and holistic chiropractic. I didn't really grow up with any of that stuff. My dad was a pharmacist, so for every ache and pain, there's a pill. And eventually, I just realized that's just not working any longer. So I had to really reach out, and I started doing massage therapy. And after getting my license, working on people, I would start hearing and intuiting things. I work on someone's back, and I would hear they're really angry at their father. And so I would just dare myself sometimes to say, "Have you had a fight with your dad recently, or whenever?" And it was always on, and which was just more confirmation of these intuitive abilities coming through. And eventually, it just became something that was so common. And then I realized there was this phrase for it called medical intuition, which I don't really use anymore. It's kind of too generic for me right now. I think most people know what they're dealing with. What they really want is intuitive guidance on how to reverse it or how to heal it. What's the actual cause of it? So I try to focus on that as much as possible.
And were you ever thrown when this was happening? I'm often asked the question, was I nervous when I started channeling of the channeling itself, or was I nervous of what other people would think? I'm asked that all the time. How were those two things for you?
Oh, no problem at all. Not true. Yeah, sure, it was, you don't just walk around on the street corner screaming out, "Hey, I can channel source energy, come here." You start out pretty quiet. Well, I start out pretty quiet first person. So eventually it became appreciated enough that I was able to kind of just step into a new way of being with it. And it's more of a conscious channel, a little different how you do it. When I'm hearing things, the Dave part of me is is still there. Like I can filter something if I wanted to. Of course I don't, but it's not the kind of thing where Dave leaves the building and just his body and voice are speaking. So I like it because it feels right. It feels so good. And just to be able to help people with things they've been struggling with sometimes for years or decades, just by channeling the right words, even one sentence can make such a big difference. I've been on the receiving end of that as well. And of course, in the practitioner end of it. So it's just, win-win. So, I still don't scream it on the corner, but it is in my books, on my website, etc. So, there was a guy who had this quote a long time ago where he said, "Wear your learning like a pocket watch, only take it out when asked what time it is." And I just kind of resonate with that. I don't need to just scream about it. And, people know, people can feel it. The empaths in the room always find me before they even know what I do for a living. If I'm in a group of people, next thing you know, there's 3 or 4 empaths around me, and I can just feel there's a resonance there. And eventually, we find out why.
It's beautiful. I've worked a lot with encouraging, guiding offering support to people who are stepping out with their work in the world. And the one thing I've always said to people is, you get very worried, or we get very worried about what are people going to think. And the beauty of it is, people are very quick to deselect you if there is no resonance or if you are of no value to them. So you don't have to worry too much about the people who think what you're doing is crazy, because they're not going to spend a lot of their time in the resistant state of just focusing on you. They're looking for what they need too. So I love how we all find our tribe in that way.
Yeah, beautifully put. On occasion, I do get someone who announces they're a skeptic right from the beginning. And I say, great. I would totally welcome that. I say, I am too. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's do some work. Let's see what's really underneath it. And it always leads to, I really encourage people to be as authentic with whatever they're feeling, even if they're angry at me, just to speak it. Sometimes having that heard is a healing in and of itself. And often it shows something to me that, what's underneath what's going on. Is this a replication of a prior pattern making itself known right now? So I really bless it, like skepticism, resistance. I'm all for it. I look at resistance more like a detour sign on a road. It's going to take a little bit longer to where we want to go, but we know we're going to get there safely. And so there's no fight anymore. I'm done with that. I'm so done fighting.
I love what you're saying too, because it reminds us of the multidimensionality of all of us. Because I do think sometimes people assume, because you use your intuition in your life, perhaps, or with your friends, or perhaps it's your job, that therefore there's no skepticism in you. But actually, we're all a little bit of everything, depending on the moment, depending on the scenario. We've got this very linear training and view of what a human being is. And yet, for me, we are shockingly complex. I mean, we're simple in some ways, but we're shockingly complex in terms of how many perspectives and dimensions there are inside every person at every moment.
Yeah, beautifully put. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I remember when we first had lunch, I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2015, I was in Portland, and you shared with me about your book, which is called Self-Care for the Self-Aware. And what I loved about this book that you created is you published it independently, you self-published, but it had this incredible following and you sold many, many copies. And the only reason I bring that up is because I think so often we, certainly in our generation growing up, the only way to perhaps reach people was going through traditional models or media outlets or publishing houses. And yet here you were having this very evidence-based, successful book. And if I can just quote some of your bio, it was in Amazon's top 20 for 41 months, which is almost a whole year. It's no mean feat. The tagline for your book is a guide for highly sensitive people, empaths, intuitives, and healers. And it was your second book, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Dave?
Right. First on empaths and sensitives, but second overall. And I remember you saying, that's a great title, Dave. You should roll with that. That should be in all your workshops, and your next book should be the sequel, part 2. I should have listened to you.
No, not necessarily. I guess there's 2 questions I have for you. One is a bit more personal about the book, and then the other one is a question I like to ask on behalf of our listeners and viewers. What propelled you to write a book and figure out all the steps it would take to self-publish? What was the drive, and what was that experience like? Because I'm sure many listeners and viewers are either in that process right now or have perhaps done that themselves.
Yeah. My first book did pretty well, and it was done through Findhorn, which is a pretty major outfit. And they had the first right of refusal on the second book, which was the Self-Care for the Self-Aware, and they weren't interested. So after my ego was done being mad at them, the other part of the ego said, now what are we going to do to get back at them? Only partially true. It was just guided, really. It was, this is what needs to happen. So I went with a company called Balboa, which is a subsidiary of Hay House. And of course, like many, with the hopes that Hay House was eventually going to pick it up. They didn't, but that's totally okay. Like you said, it's done really well. And I think it's a really great introduction to this world. And I, was able to see the commonalities that so many people that I was working with were dealing with, and their own characteristics, emotional states, etc. It became really obvious that this has to be brought to a bigger level than I can possibly do in one-on-one sessions, which are great, but obviously a book can go a lot further and for much less money. So that's it's a win-win. So I did that book, and again, 41 consecutive months. It was, I guess that's almost 3.5 years, give or take. So, I was really proud of it, and yet, this because you're always creating new things, new albums, new books, new material. Um, the only one you focus on is the most current one, right? It's the best one by far, right? So the newer book, which came out in 2018, Empathypedia, is a much more detailed version of what's in self-care for the self-aware. So self-care is a great intro for a lot of people, still doing really well, selling a lot. Even here in Portland, the local bookstore is always contacting me for copies. The follow-up is a lot more detailed. It's called Empathypedia, so that's something to look out for as well. And I do have a new one coming out. I just started writing it this week. So, when you first start writing something, all the resistance shows up. So I'm dealing with that right now. But I think I'm going to guess fall of 2020, it should be out. And that's going to take it to the next level.
What are some of the resistances you're experiencing, if you're willing to share any? Because that's something we all go through as creators or people bringing things into the world.
Yeah, totally. On the outside, it looks like checking email.
Or having this conversation with me.
All the above. It can result in looking at going to the kitchen pretty often. But what's really cool is through my awareness practice, I catch it pretty quickly. And sometimes I just feel in and say, okay, does this need to be written right now? Because some people's creative time is like 9 a.m. every morning. Some, it could be any time. I'm the latter. It could be 3 in the morning. It could be 3 in the afternoon. And if it's not flowing, it's just not flowing. So I step away, do some yoga, take a walk, whatever, and come back. And then usually it starts flowing again. There's also the background noise of how am I going to edit all this? Because I have all these points all over the place in my head. And how am I going to get it all on paper and then edit it? But like the last book, it always happens. I remember when I was doing the final edits on the last book, I lost track of something. And Spirit said, it's on page 74. Like, why am I worried at all? Right? The answers just showed up. So I went to 74. It was exactly what I was looking for. It needed to go to like 121 or whatever. So copy and paste. So, when I catch these things, when I catch the mind drifting or the fears coming up or whatever it is, I try to just be with it, right? Just kind of see what's there. Is it telling me something deeper? Do I need to look at something? Is there a grief coming up? Is there a fear coming up? It's probably a better answer than my first answer for this, right? How do I really deal with whatever forms of resistance are there? How do I embrace them? And what are they really about? And what are they showing me? Like, and not to fight them, right? Not to be, what's wrong with you? Get into that self-critical mode. It never works, never will. So little self-investigation. If I can't feel it, I call a practitioner and they're happy to tell me, oh yeah, you're worried about this. And then I go back to that same thing. Like, what am I worried about? Spirit's got this whole thing all worked out already. I just need to step into it.
Well, and it's interesting because something hits me as a memory as you're saying that. I remember many, many years ago, probably 2008 or something, the Z's were talking about our acts of creation. And they said the one thing that many of you forget is that there is a timing of this thing for the world too. And so some of you are like beating yourselves up that you can't finish this thing on the deadline that you had in mind. But they said as soon as you set in motion with a creational act, something that you want to share with the world, everything starts lining up for when it's the right time for the world to receive it too. So I've always remembered that one whenever my own mind has wondered, well, why isn't this working right now? And it's like, well, maybe it's just not time too. So
Totally.
We need all the help we can get with mental resistance, I think. But the other question I wanted to ask you that's a bit more general, and I guess many people who tune into a show like this are already aware of what being an empath or a sensitive is, but perhaps not everyone. So could you give us a little bit of an overview from your perspective of what characterizes us as an empath and a sensitive? I know it's a big topic, but perhaps just a few headlines would help some people who are new to the process.
Sure. I think I can do it pretty quickly. Highly sensitive person, pretty literal, sensitive to environment, to feelings, to other people's energies, to world events, you name it. Could be anything. For me, an empath is someone that takes it one step further. We don't just feel what's coming in, we actually embody it. So if we're not trained well, if I can say that, if we're not really skilled with these abilities, we kind of walk around saying, I'll take your grief, I'll take your fear, I'll take your anger, and then we digest it. We wonder why we're having digestion problems, right? We're kind of eating all these things and just thank you, right? It's my job, and that's the common belief underneath this process. Is it's my job to be there for everyone else. And while that seems nice, it's really quite material. It's very damaging to the self. And there are ways of working with this that I've really honed in on that still allow each of us to be caring, to be nurturing, to be in our hearts, to be there for others, but also take care of our own selves so that we're not being drained by other people. So maybe a little longer explanation than I thought it was going to be, but
Beautiful.
I think it's important to know this, and that there is a way through this. You can't get around it. If it's who you are, you might as well make friends with it and learn the best. Some people are born musicians. Doesn't mean they stop learning about it, right? You jam with other musicians. You take a music theory class. There's always something else to learn. So I've really found that using the steps that came to me, people can be their true, authentic, best versions of themselves and not get burnt out. It's such a common trait. All kinds of pains and illness are based around this self-burnout kind of thing. And it's just not working any longer. We really need to question this conditioning that we learned when we're younger, most of the time, that says, everyone else comes first. It's really dangerous.
Everything you've just described, I've had some experiences of myself, but I've worked with a lot of people who have shown up in all of those areas. And one thing I've noticed is it can be challenging for people to let go of that identity, specifically the empaths. So, for example, there can be a line of thinking with a lot of the empaths I've worked with. Well, if I don't do that, then who am I? And I guess when you mention martyrdom, I can kind of correlate that as how they're perhaps holding themselves in place in that way. How would you help somebody who perhaps identifies with what you just said, but has placed all their value on that ability and are not yet quite willing to see that there could be a different way of doing it that could actually give them their life force back?
All right, Tully. Well, first thing, great question. Thank you. First thing we have to do is acknowledge that that's there. That's the form of resistance that's showing up. And it's often very subtle, but it comes out through the processes that I take people through where it's so obvious that, we have to do something with it. And a lot of times I'll ask directly, so who will you be without these characteristics of who you've been? And, the mind can easily go into, well, I'll be free and all this. And sure, that's true. The deeper reality is most of us don't know. We don't have the experience of what it would be like to not be who we've been. So a lot of fear comes up, and then the mind comes in and tries to micromanage it, and that never works. So I invite people to say, let's be in the unknowing. If we can trust in your divine connection, your spiritual self, let's co-create who you're meant to be, as opposed to this idea of who you think you are or who others need you to be. So actually embrace that resistance more than figure it out, micromanage it, get over analytical about it. There's usually a fear underneath it. And often we get to that fear and we process that fear, or it could be a sadness. And when we process that energy within, in the safe container, of course, that is what really creates the true freedom. Then we have an experience. And then most of the time when I'm working with someone, even in a short period of time, they can say, oh, wow, that's what it feels like to be free. They can feel it in real time. That's super exciting to me. Yeah.
It's funny hearing you say all that. I'm reminded of times in my own life where I had my resistance to changing my way of operating. So before I started doing one-on-one sessions with people, I hadn't really paid attention to the fact that I would go and do my day job all day, and then I would come home and normally do at least 2 hours a night on the phone with at least two different people, pretty much every night of the week. That really was a very much counseling relationship. And I had put myself in that pattern. And I don't regret it, because it was me learning. It was also what I needed, I can tell. But there came a point when I realized, especially when I started doing this for work, I was like, oh, hang on a second. And again, that martyrdom or the unconscious martyrdom can kick in. And so I've met some people who had that perhaps more chronically than I did, but there seems to be this idea or belief that runs through healers, empaths, sensitives, that we have to save the world. And I know for me, a huge breakthrough was when I realized that was A, not my job, B, not possible, and C, no one person is going to do that. And to actually just be present with all of it, like the mess, the darkness, the light, which I think previously I'd been in resistance to, and I'd wanted to uplift or clean or heal or move the energy in the room, and was doing that very unconsciously. So that all comes back to me when I hear what you just said.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good memory, and I'm glad you learned from it. Right? I would love for you to save the world.
I would love you to.
Maybe together.
Somebody. How
we have to work on oourselves.
Yeah, of course.
And it's just a reminder, because it is such an important point. Marianne Williamson had that great phrase: when we work on ourselves, I'm paraphrasing, when we work on ourselves, we unconsciously liberate others to do the same. And it's a ripple effect outward. And yes, it's scary when you look at the shape of the world, and it is what it is. But at the same time, if each individual person does what they came here to do, right, I think we'd get through it a lot quicker. And we don't always know what we're here to do, and that's part of that process of co-creation, narrowing down. I'm not this, I'm not that. Neil Donald Walsh had a great, like always repeats: you find out who you are by finding out who you're not. In the world of contrast and duality, it's hard to escape, so I might as well embrace that too. So if someone is an author, let them write. If someone's a healer, let them heal. Someone's a singer, sing. Someone could be all three. Actually, you are all three. So it is up to you. No, I'm just kidding.
That's you make an interesting point, because one of the resistances I had to walking back towards music in a bigger way in the middle of 2019, when I had a huge epiphany that literally I was on an airplane, I was channel writing for myself. I'd just done this really wonderful event in London, and I was kind of reflecting on what felt off in me at the time. Something felt off. And my guides gave me a whole load of information, which I wrote down, and they said, without music, your soul will crumble. So that was the best thing they could have said to me, because that was like, oh, ouch, I can't ignore that.
Yeah.
But my immediate resistance was, that's not what people want me for. I was very aware at that point that people wanted the healing, the channeling, the inspirational speaking, the energy update. So I was caught in my role too. And I had to sit with that for a couple of days and then decide, well, that's a contract I'm not willing to prison myself in. And if that contract goes away because I start doing this, sure, I surrender. So it's funny, it's a reminder to me of the identities that we get locked into. And the Z's always said, similar to what you just quoted from Marianne and Neil, they said your energy is what people feel. And so if you are looking after and enhancing your energy, that's far more important than your behavior. You mentioned this at the beginning of the call. You said empaths find me because they can feel me and they know I'm there. So I feel in our culture, and I see this a lot with women more so than men at this point, because they've often been the nurturers and they've been the people who can emotionally hold space for everyone in their life to a higher degree thus far. That they're often caught in behavior roles around, well, if I start doing what I want to do, what about X, Y, and Z person that's leaning on me and depending on me? And the Z's would always say they will either adapt stop leaning on you in that way, or they'll find someone else who's now willing to play that role. So we also really have to trust the energy of it. And you've used the word ego a couple of times. It's our mind and our ego that makes us get into these fixed ideas of who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do. And we've deadened the life force that wants to come through us culturally.
I really appreciate that. And also it raises another question. How much of who we think we are is literally who we think we are and not who we're not really who we are? How much of it is still in people-pleasing mode, trying to get love from a parent or both? Trying, all these different things that form who we think we are. They're steps on the journey. They might not be the final ones. So I think it's really important to always, or whenever possible, to be open. What's the next thing? And be open and just kind of roll with it. If it feels right, if it brings up fear, great. Process that fear and see what's on the other side of it. And maybe it takes you in even a completely different direction. That's why I joked earlier. I said, so far this is great, but it can end tomorrow. I could be, I don't know, doing something. I don't know. I was going to be a medical doctor, but I know it takes more training than that. But, you get the idea. So yeah, I really appreciate that following the guidance, I think, is the ultimate manifestation tool for really everything. And often it's very surprising. I mean, when you were a kid, if someone told you you'd be doing this, right? You
couldn't have even envisioned it.
Yeah, totally. I grew up thinking I was going to be a rock star. I had hair down, big curly hair down my shoulders, and played guitar loud and fast. And similarly, I had a little bit of a shift even in my own music years back. I went to more acoustic, more heartfelt. Getting away from that ego, look at me, how fast I can play, and just play even 3 chords, but do it from the heart and melt a room while doing it. That's fun stuff.
Well, and you bring up music. Now, we have a mutual friend, Barry Goldstein, but you and Barry go way back. And were you roommates? Did I get that right? Way back in the day?
In college, yeah.
In college.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And similarly, we both joke that if anyone said to us then that you'll be doing what you're doing now, yeah, it wouldn't look good.
I see this beautiful guitar behind you. How is music in your life now? Like, what role does that play?
In and out. Sometimes I just forget, and sometimes it just beckons. It calls me. Funny thing with speaking, you're all about energy. There's energy in seemingly inanimate objects. When I don't play the guitar, or this one or another one, even more so, it's very sensitive to my energy. If I don't pick it up for a few weeks, it doesn't really sound that good. And it starts sounding better as I'm playing it. And then if I play it the next day, it kind of picks up where I left off. It's really strange. It's a really tangible, audible difference. So the energy is just going everywhere. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. A question for you that hit me that I was given yesterday in an Ask Me Anything episode of this podcast that you're the perfect person to answer. So you are someone who is highly empathic, highly sensitive, and here you are doing one-on-one sessions, leading groups. How have you learned to let go in between those sessions and with those clients? Because that is one of the resistances that many sensitive people have around walking toward healing. They're worried they'll get engulfed by what they engage with. So do you have any advice on that or any personal experience to share?
Yeah, there's so much, and we could spend an hour on that alone. There are tools in the books plural, that can be more tangible as far as things to do. But the thing that just really felt guided to talk about even more than that right now is a level of attachment. If I'm super attached to a particular client or a particular client's outcome, that's not me being in my strength. That's me being in my fear. Are they going to like me? Are they going to come back, right? What are they going to say when they're done? Are they liking this? Are they liking me? That's all fear-based. And people, especially sensitives, are going to pick up on that. So if I can be healthily unattached, still, of course, compassionate and loving, people feel that. And then there's a freedom in me that recognizes I'm just the conduit. I'm going to hear the information or I'm not. And if I'm not, I'll tell someone, hey, I'm not really getting any information. I'm sorry, we'll try again some other time maybe, or maybe I'm not the practitioner for you. It doesn't happen often. Typically, it's flowing through easily 99% of the time. But that level of attachment is so important that without that, I'd be like laying down, you know, doing shavasana, corpse pose after every session. Right now, I can, I kind of balance it out, so it's a healthy number of people for me to work with. But the more I can remember, it's not me doing the work, the freer I'm going to be, and the better experience the other person's going to have, because they're being loved from something much deeper than the Dave part of me. They're being loved through source energy at that point, and they feel that. So for anyone that's struggling with these questions, how much to do, what to do, why aren't I doing what I think I should be doing, really try to look at this level of attachment that you have. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, where we say, like, know the why, right? It's so important. Why are you doing? And if there's anything personal in there that, we feel we need to do something to be a certain way, to get a certain feeling, to be loved, to be adored, to make money, that's actually weakening the transmission of energy and information, both, for healing and for mind appeasement as well. So, it's not an easy one, but it's well worth the journey.
Did you find as you went through the years of doing it that you learned how to train yourself around that? Because I know for me, I really learned on the job. It was the only way I could have learned.
Yeah, I mean, I did as much reading as I could, but like you said, it's on the job. You figure out what works, what doesn't work, and if you're like this, at the end of the session, it's not working. And this is actually really common. A lot of people I work with, they're out in the world, and they'll have a conversation with someone, whether they know them or not, just some stranger or whatever, and they'll feel drained afterwards. But that other person walks away saying, "Oh, in this case, that Lee, what a great guy," right? And you're just like, "Oh, all weakened and drained," and there was an energy transfer that was not healthy for you at that point. They were siphoning your energy. So we need to be really connected with our own true essence. And yeah, a lot of it's on the job. Yeah.
What you just said there, I know because I could feel it run through my body when you said it. That hit deep for a lot of viewers and listeners. And I hear about this a lot in relationship questions. People talking about difficult family dynamics, or perhaps you're in a romantic partnership or a marriage where the energy is kind of shut down a bit and it feels transactional, and people saying, I feel drained by my partner's pessimism. Or do you have any advice around beginning to grapple with changing those patterns? Because a lot of people have a lot of fear about shifting those dynamics, even though they might be suddenly realizing that the dynamic is not healthy.
Yeah, of course, everyone's different. So general advice is maybe difficult, but what I can say is, first, be aware of what's happening, obviously, but also take ownership. If you say, I'm getting drained by my partner, okay, that's one mindset, and it may or may not be true, but what I think is more important is I'm letting myself be drained by my partner.
Totally.
Personal responsibility, so important. And then we take steps. A lot of times, sometimes if I'm doing relationship work or someone's telling me, oh, he's doing this and he's doing that, and I say, okay, I get that, and I don't dispute your assessment of what's going on, and he's not here right now. It's just you and I. So how can we work together to get you to that next level where you can be in your heart self, in your true self, in your authentic self, work with any fears around that. And what sometimes happens is their partner then notices it. It could be very subtly or not, it depends. And relationships change just by the one person changing. For better or for worse, they're going to change. But even if it's for worse, quote unquote, where you're no longer in that relationship, sure, it can be very painful. But if that's where you're kind of meant to go with this, why fight it? Right? If spirit is showing you you've outgrown this person, or maybe that person's outgrown you, ideally we connect with someone we can share anything with and do it from a personal accountability place. Like, I feel blank, right? One of the more common relationship tools that I've read about was something like, I feel blank when you blank. So please don't blank so I don't feel blank. And there's a lot of logic in that. And I kind of sat with that at one point. I said, you know what? I get that, but there's something missing for me. So I really, I did my meditation, and I was really clear that it was disempowering. I am asking someone else to change so I don't feel something in that case.
Hmm.
So what I do now, I just shorten that, or I put a little asterisk on it, and I say, hey, just to let you know, I feel blank when you blank, and I'm not asking you to change a thing. I'm just letting you know how I feel. And from that place, that other person can feel more empowered to make the change because they see how it's affecting me in this case, right? Whereas if I make a request and they're not really wanting to make that request, resentment builds, and that builds more tension in the relationship, right? So it always goes back to personal responsibility. Now, granted, in extreme cases, if there's abuse, of course, get out, right? Take care of you. That's a given. But if it's not anywhere near that and there's decent communication, try it on. I feel blank when you blank. I'm not asking you to change, just letting you know how I feel. And then just leave it at that and see what happens. And a lot of times the other person will kind of pick up on those cues, especially if they're carrying about you, right? Oh, I don't want them to feel that. Then they make the change.
It's beautiful because you leave space for the person to walk toward you. One of the things that I'm very aware of that can be very triggering in boundary communication, and this is why most teachers of boundaries will say, any sentence you use, you have to take the blaming and the shaming out of it. And I think we see that a lot. And of course, if someone comes to you and says, hey, you're doing this and it's making me feel this, so I need you to stop. You try that on for size in your own body, you're kind of trapped. Like, you've been put into a corner and you're being told the only way to get out of the corner is this. But your version, which is great, just takes away the entrapment of the other person and instead puts the truth into the room, which is great, because that's also when you really get to see how healthy perhaps the awareness the other person has of how they're treating you, or their desire to treat you well. Because the ones who are going to fight you on that time and time and time again, that's a really good sign that no, they're not willing to value you in the way that you would like to be valued, or in the way that you're expressing you've realized it's important for you to be valued. So that's, either way, that's a great beginning to changing things.
Yeah, agreed.
Communication and sensitives is a really interesting one, because if I backtrack a little bit in my own life, I was very guilty of assuming that just because I was picking up on things in a room, everyone else was. So, it took me a long time to learn, oh, no, you actually need to tell that person that you love and that you have a really good friendship or relationship with what's going on in you. You can't expect them to read your mind. And equally, even though we pick up on things, we can be wrong. We can sometimes be colored by our own wounds or our own triggers, or we're slightly misinterpreting what we're feeling. So communication is so key for sensitives and empaths, especially in learning to know enough about what you need and how you feel. And then the next step, when you're really clear about it, is finding a way to communicate that to those in your life. Because I've seen so many people have radical improvements in all kinds of relationships in their lives when they've taken the time to be willing to communicate. And again, one of the resistances is often, well, why should I have to? Well, because we're actually not full. Even if you're one of the best intuitives in the world, you don't fully know what the other person is feeling or why. So it's interesting we're on communication, because I think that, for me personally, and I think for many of us, was one of the biggest breakthroughs, like realizing I needed to communicate, and I needed to do it clearly and always lovingly, as much as you can, of course. But yeah, your communication can be your greatest ally in terms of moving through the world and your relationships.
Yeah, you mentioned one concept in there that really jumped out that I'm really big on, which is personal filtering. We see things through our own lens. Sometimes they're rose-colored, sometimes the opposite. Our entire life experience is what creates that lens. And this is one of the reasons why you can ask 10 psychics same question and get 10 different answers. Some will be more fear-based, some will be more love-based, some will be in between. How do we bring that into our communication, recognize, oh, I'm seeing through my lens what this person is doing, right? So if someone's getting angry at me, for example, doesn't happen too often, unfortunately, but still, right? I can step back, still be in my heart and let the energy flow, whatever needs to come out of that person, but also recognize this. If I look at it through my own lens, my old lens, which is I'm gonna take it personally, and I'm gonna get defensive, I'm gonna come back, my ego is gonna attack, basically. So then there's ego fighting ego. It never works. But if I'm present to my own personal filtering, even if I don't know exactly what it's made of, I can kind of step back and say, okay, this is their stuff and it's showing up for healing. Can I hold space for that? If I can't, honor that too, right? Step out of the room if you have to, right? Like we said earlier, sometimes you just got to get away, and it's totally okay, right? Do what feels right. The filtering is just so important, and you see in a very polarized planet, if not just country, right? The filtering it's just incredible, the power of that. How we can believe things about a certain group of people that we've never met that aren't loving things. And eventually when we meet them, we say, oh my God, this is just a beautiful person. Same concerns, same desires, same needs as myself, right? So it happens on the individual, on a global scale. How do we do our work to clear the lens? And that comes with a non-attachment and a lot of inner work and recognizing that everyone's doing the best that they're doing, right? Someone just yesterday was asking me, how can this person do that? I can't believe it. And I said, you know what? They've manifested their pain externally on you. Light bulb, right? You've internalized your pain. That's why you have symptoms, right? What if we could bring that pain to the light and heal it together? Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing, right? So there's so much here. There's so much to that. I could probably go on, but I just want to sit with that for a second. Okay.
One of the clues that I always have when I'm triggered is because the feeling is repetitive, or the thought. It might be a new person, it might be a slightly new situation. And if I can find in my reaction history, that's always my moment to go, oh, okay, something's moving through me here that I need to be with and sit with before I either respond or before I come back to this relationship engagement and see what's really true in the moment rather than what's historical for me.
Perfectly put. What's true, not what's historical. Love it.
Yeah, but I had many years of not, I'm sure like all of us, many years of like not getting that, and kind of just playing a lot of it out. And hopefully we'll get to refine and evolve that more and more as we grow. That's the aim and the hope, right?
Yeah.
Question for you. You just mentioned our polarized world. And certainly I think for me, I can kind of go back five years really, where I feel like the rearing of polarization has come up in my awareness in the world anyway, in a bigger way, just what was already there amplified.
Sure.
How have you done in the last couple of years, which have been certainly the most unique set of circumstances I've ever lived through in this lifetime? How have you found, or I should say, what have you found in the last couple of years? What have you noticed? What has come to you or through you as a result of these lockdown experiences and the changed world that we're living in right now?
Right. A lot. Ultimately, a reminder that who I'm being is the only thing I can control. And if I'm angered by someone else being in their fear and acting it out, it's a reflection of something as yet unhealed within myself. So the external is a representation of what's internal. Some people have it on the big stage, some just at home. It doesn't matter, right? We all have this polarity that we're seeing, we all have within us. Right? You mentioned earlier, we have the, I don't remember exact words, but we have the light and we have the shadow. And if they're not integrated in a truly holistic, loving way, the shadow is going to get more and more power. And I think we're seeing that on a lot of places right now, and maybe have been for a long time. Obviously, everything's amplified for multiple reasons right now. But I think if we can remember that shadow lives within me, how do I heal that and work with that? And shadow works, shadow work is really powerful. And a lot of people that I've worked with have come from a more traditional New Age background. There's not a lot of discussion of this, where it's it's referred to as a love and light crowd. And I get that. That's beautiful. If you can be in your love and light, great. But Ram Dass talks about, he thought he was enlightened, and he went to his family, and a minute into being with his family, he realized he wasn't enlightened. Right? So it's easy to be in your love and light with other people that think like we do. How do we bring that to the shadow? How do we bring that to people that are in a lot of pain, that are unfortunately acting it out outward, at others, hurting others, etc. There's a lot there, but the shadow doesn't just go away because we tell it to. It doesn't really have a linear capacity. It's pure emotion. And it has to be loved into submission, in my experience. You can't reason with it. If you could, we'd be done with this game already, the whole everything, but it's very alive in others. And, as we notice that we get triggered by certain things, like you said, what's historical? What's bringing that up in me that's making me act or feel in a certain way when I see other people doing what they're doing? And it doesn't mean to be unconscious and have your head in the sand. It means to recognize the bigger picture reality whenever possible. Simply put, hurt people hurt people. How can we be, as healers, how can we be in our hearts to heal this hurt? For those that are willing. I think eventually everyone's gonna head that way, to be willing, because we'll just get sick and tired of replaying the same traumas over and over.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's going to happen in a year or 1,000 years, but I can only do my part in that. And people like yourself and others that you've interviewed and that we're all just doing our part. And that's all we can do. And as much as we can get frustrated by the big picture, let the frustration be there, but also direct it towards what can we actually do / be in relationship to that, right? Who and how can I be in relationship to what is occurring? Is one of my favorite questions. Who and how can I be in relationship to what's occurring or who's in front of me, right? And if we can intuit that answer, we've got a connection, we've got trust, we've got authenticity, we have a potential for healing.
I love that because it allows the flow to come back. I think often when we're stuck in an emotion and then we go to our mind and we start reinforcing stories about that emotion, it's because we can't move it through. And I know for me, this came up in a question on the Ask Me Anything podcast that we taped yesterday. Something about how do you deal with doom and gloom scenarios, or people who you're around who are very doom and gloom. And actually for me in this whole period of time, certainly in those first few months, I actually found an enormous amount of power and liberation in playing out the worst case scenarios. And years ago, I would never have done that. I would have resisted that. I would have thought, no, that couldn't. But I actually found that in those moments of fear, when I allowed myself to go into the fear, not around it, not out of it, I had breakthroughs, and it got me back to the very state that you're talking about, which is, where am I now? What's going on right now? How can I be present with and influence my environment? So I love what you said.
Thank you. And you bring up a really important thing, that is, when we're in a place of fear, our body goes into fight or flight, and the emotional center of our body is super ignited, which means the rational ability is decreased exponentially. And that's why you can't, just think about it. It's hard to have an argument. It's hard to have a reasonable, fact-based conversation with someone who's just yelling at you, right? It's just not going to work. But how do we build up a trust where there can be some communication? But maybe even more important, how do we balance that within ourselves? How do we embrace our heightened emotional state and learn to use it for good, and learn to use it, like you said, like let yourself process some of those worst case scenario fears. It's scary. Not everyone's going to want to do it, but there's light on the other side. And this is one of the beautiful things about doing all the emotional work that I do, is that the awareness that I like to share is that your mind can't micromanage your emotions. They speak different languages, right? So you can only heal emotional wounds with emotional work. So just, think about that. It's like, it just makes so much sense, but still we're like, oh, I just need more vitamin Q10 or whatever, like all these external things. And granted, you might need that on the physical level, but if the causes of your pain, illness, affliction, or inner battle with your own mind are energetic and emotional, we have to deal with it on those levels. And yes, it is harder, no question. And yet, to me, it's the only way to go. I mean, that can be taken a negative way. I don't mean the only way to go. I mean, it's the way I've chosen to go, and the people that I work with have found most benefit. There's a time and place for everything. If someone needs physical only, if someone needs, energy only, great. Like there's, we should use all tools possible and address every level of ourselves when we're trying to heal. We get very used to this very mono-focused thing, right? I have a headache, so I'm going to take a pill, right? What does that actually do? It dulls the perception of the headache. The headache doesn't really go away. The causes of the headache are still alive within you, right? So you can take pill after pill, you become dependent on the pill. But what if we really did the work and found out what's actually causing that headache? Or what's causing that fibromyalgia? What's causing that depression? What's causing that anxiousness? Here's an interesting thing that came to me recently very clearly. Anxiousness, for many, not for everyone obviously, is trying to control emotions with the mind. Because it doesn't work, the mind gets even more worked up. I really need to control this energy. I can't be out there screaming and cursing and yelling and crying. Well, maybe you can, even if you do it in your own home, right? If that's what's showing up and that's what's authentic, it's important to process that. And what I've found, and I'm sure you have found this as well, is it's very hard to do on one's own because the mind is so good at evading what's actually true. So someone holding and co-creating a safe container for the healing is vital. I've had some really top name people reach out to me when I first started doing this, and I was kind of thinking, why can't they do it themselves? And they said, well, what made you think we could? The mind gets in the way. So in a safe container, we can actually get past the mind, into the heart, into the body, into the truth. And on the other side of that issue, on the other side of that emotional blockage, is the freedom, the clarity, and the healing that we're really searching for. But it has to go through. And I just want to add one more thing to that, because I know that can sound scary, and I get that. But again, the safe container will make it less scary. The other side of that, and this is what I've been specializing on in the last decade or so, is absorbed energy from other people can create the blockages within ourselves as well. In which case, there are processes for giving it back to those people. It's not wrong. It's not, it's actually the healthiest thing we can do for ourselves, but it's also the healthiest thing we can do for the other person, because they need to walk their own path. There's a quick example to make it more tangible. If I'm holding my mother's sadness, and I think to myself, my mind says, I can't give her back this sadness. She's going to, it's going to take her to the next level of that. I can't handle that. Well, when I really sat with that, I said, is that true? And Spirit said, not even close to true, because her soul needs to walk her path. And because oftentimes it's such a minor piece for the other person, they won't even know that you've given it back to them, but I'll feel better. I'll feel more whole. I'll feel unburdened. And I've actually helped thousands of people reduce, if not eliminate, symptoms of things that, major pains and illness, just by going through this process of, in a healthy way, giving it back to the other person. And the best thing about that, or among the best things about that, is each time we do that, the body gets a learning. It's not just a mental thing. The body gets a learning. I'm safe and I'm still okay if I give this back to someone else, and they're okay as well. We do this metaphysically, obviously. You don't have to call a person or talk to them because, they think you're crazy, right? Right? But it's super effective, super powerful, and when done well, can just work wonders for so many people.
I think that's the perfect moment for me to ask you about the course you are about to start doing. So I know on January 22nd of this year, you are running a group course called Healing the Original Wound. So this is very timely because the day that this episode airs is probably about 5 or 6 days away from that beginning. Could you tell us a little about what that experience is going to be?
Yeah, I've done a few of these already. They've all been super powerful. The original wound is the disconnection from source, or the perceived disconnection from source when we're younger, and also the physical disconnection from our mothers after being born. And it creates a horrible level of abandonment that I found filters and colors every experience we have from that. So many things we do are to try to heal that void that's left by that separation, and they just don't work. So we look for void filling in online, media, dating, sport. It can be anything, and there's nothing wrong with those things. But if you're doing it to fill the void, it's not going to work. So we really go into that wound with safety, with love, with compassion as well. It's even under everything that we've spoken about so far. So it does incorporate a lot of things that we've spoken about. It can go in any number of tangents. I don't have a syllabus, per se. It just happens in the moment. I feel what and I'm sure you work similarly. You feel what's in the room, right? And there's usually some kind of consensus that is being formed by all the people there, and I speak to that. I'm just hearing the whole thing. So it's very participatory in that there's exercise. It's not just me talking, which some people are into, right? But after a while, we need a break, right? We need time to integrate, kind of like you need shavasana at the end of yoga. You can't just keep doing yoga over and over and over all day long and expect it to be healthy. You got to integrate what you've just done. So there's time for integration. I take people through group exercises like that return to sender that I spoke about before. I didn't name it. We also talk about healthy prevention from incoming energy. We typically hear things like put up a wall, and I get it, and there's logic to that, but let's think about it. It's fear-based. Get it away from me, right? And fear constricts the body energy. So I was shown a way to actually open and allow it to go through and filter it so you're not a sponge anymore, but you still can be a bit of a funnel, so you can still benefit from the connection with other people. You can still connect and respond to what they really need, even beyond what they think they need. But if you're doing this too much, again, fear-based, you're not going to have that connection. So it's a whole different way of looking at high sensitivity and empaths. And all of it is discussed, typically all of it is discussed in that course. Of course, it's in the books as well. There's no book quite yet on healing the original wound, which is probably the one that's going to be out in the fall of 22. Now that we're saying it, it has to happen, right?
I think you've just cast a spell and a commitment. So
okay, I'm in. I'm in.
Dave, thank you so much for today. It's been lovely to get to talk with you more about everything that you do and also some of these topics. And I know many people who are watching or listening will want to find you, and whether it's your books or your courses or any of the work that you've got there, they can find all of it at your website, which is davemarkowitz.com. If you're watching, we will put that up on the screen. And if you're listening, or if you're watching, check the show notes, because we always put links in the notes, either underneath the YouTube or the Facebook video, or in the podcast show notes on whatever platform you're listening. But love you, brother, and great to be with you today. And I'm excited for everything that you're doing next year. And thank you for impacting the world in the way that you have.
Right back at you. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Lee Harris. I'm an intuitive and a channeler, and every year in January, I hold a rebirth course, a way for us to look at the year that has gone and let go of what we no longer need, and look ahead at the year to come and see what we might want to create in our life. This year, I'm going to be bringing a lot of channeling to my rebirth program. So I will be channeling my guides several times throughout the course of the 2-week program, and they will be bringing transmissions through, all based on empowerment. When I was tuning in this year as to what the overarching theme for Rebirth 2022 would be, I heard very clearly from them the empowerment sessions. So that is what they will be bringing in the channeled messages, and I and my team will be supporting those messages with a series of video and audio presentations, all designed to help you reconfigure who you want to be for the year ahead. Stephen Washington will be teaching Qigong and wellness practices. I will also be doing a whole session on manifestation and creation and our habits and our patterns and how we can elevate and change those in order to bring in the new. And my team members, Marty and Wendy, will be adding some support videos, as well as an MP3 recording that you get as soon as you sign up called Your Garden of Higher Consciousness. Rebirth is always our biggest course of the year, and so we have a very large community from all over the world who tune in and, most importantly, weigh in. So we have a community forum that's completely private, and it's where you and other members can share your experiences, not only of the material, but of what's going on in your life right now and what you're looking to cultivate. So the group energy that forms around Rebirth is very strong. And we also have transcripts and worksheets. And once you are in Rebirth, you will have lifetime access to all of the materials. So even though we run most of these sessions live as live broadcasts, you don't have to be able to be there live. And if you do miss a live broadcast, you will get the replay on video and in transcript form and audio within 2 days of the broadcast. We begin on January 17th, so if it resonates with you to join us for Rebirth 2022, the empowerment sessions, I, my guides, and my team would love to welcome you.